glass house.
From the outside, the Harris family seemed perfect. Edward Harris, a successful architect whose designs appeared on magazine covers. His wife, Margaret, a graceful pianist who once performed in London but gave up the stage after their children were born. They had 2 children, Lily, a bright but restless 16-year-old, and Oliver, a 10-year-old dreamer with eyes full of wonder. The House of Glass. A few years earlier, Edward had designed their dream home, a glass mansion built on the cliffs of Cornwall. He called it a symbol of trust and transparency. "We should have nothing to hide from each other," he said as the evening sun reflected off the walls of glass. But over time, that house became a prison. Everything inside was visible, except what truly mattered. Margaret began to notice small things. How Edward stayed late in his study, how he closed his laptop when she entered, how his voice changed on the phone. One night, unable to hold back, she opened his email. There were messages. To a woman named Clara. "I can't keep this secret any longer. They deserve to know the truth. But I don't want to lose everything again." Margaret froze. It felt as if the glass walls around her had cracked, silently, invisibly, but beyond repair. When Edward came home, she was waiting at the piano. "Who is Clara?" she asked calmly, her fingers still resting on the keys. "It's not what you think," he said. He always said that when he was lying. She stopped playing, and she never touched the piano again. Children and silence. The house fell silent. Lily spent her evenings down by the shore, staring at the dark sea. She wanted to run away from the perfection, the quiet tension, the glass. Oliver, too young to understand, asked one night, "Mom, why don't you play anymore? Is the piano broken?" She smiled softly. "Yes, my love, it's broken." But one night, while everyone slept, Lily slipped into her father's study. She wasn't searching for anything, just trying to understand. She found a folder marked Clara Age. Inside were old photographs, a boy and a girl in a garden. On the back, Edward and Clara, 1982. Lily realized Clara wasn't a lover. She was his sister. The truth and the loss. The next morning, Lily confronted her father in the kitchen. "Why didn't you ever tell us you had a sister?" Edward went pale. "It's complicated," he said. And he told her. Years ago, Edward and Clara had been inseparable. But after their parents died, a terrible fight over inheritance tore them apart. The family home, the land, the money. Edward chose ambition and success. Clara chose family. He left and never looked back. Now, decades later, he had tried to reach out, secretly, afraid that Margaret wouldn't understand, that she'd think he was lying again. But the truth came too late. Margaret had already packed her things. She left a single note on the piano. "Music cannot live where lies do." The storm. That winter, a violent storm hit the Cornish coast, the worst in years. Waves crashed against the cliffs, and the wind screamed through the glass walls. Edward, who stayed in the house with the children, watched as his masterpiece, his pride, began to fracture before his eyes. When the storm finally passed, the house stood in ruins. Lily was crying, holding Oliver in her arms. "It was our home, Dad." "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "These were just walls. Our home is us." And in that moment, he understood. He had spent his life building houses of glass, when what his family needed was something solid, forgiveness, honesty, and love. 2 years later, a new house stood on the same land, smaller, warmer, built of wood instead of glass. One evening, Margaret returned. She stood by the gate, listening to the sound of music drifting from inside. Someone was playing the old piano. It was Lily. Edward stepped out onto the porch. Their eyes met in silence. And for the first time in years, they both understood. Sometimes, to truly see one another, the glass must break. 10 years had passed since the storm shattered that shining house on the cliffs. Lily Harris now lived in London, a journalist who wrote the truth about others but avoided the truth about herself. She hadn't been back to Cornwall in years. Her mother, Margaret, taught piano at a conservatory. Her father, Edward, after suffering a heart attack, had left architecture behind and lived quietly in the small wooden house they once built together. Lily rarely called, not because she didn't care, but because memories still cut like shards of glass. Then one November evening, she received a message from her brother. "Dad is missing. Come home." When she stepped off the train, the air smelled of salt and rain. The coast hadn't changed, the same wind, the same dark cliffs, the same ocean that once swallowed their old home. Oliver met her at the station. He'd grown tall, serious, with eyes that mirrored their father's. "When did you last see him?" he asked. "At Christmas. He said everything was fine. He hasn't answered in 3 days." And Oliver pulled a letter from his pocket. "I found this in his study." On the envelope, there was only one word: Clara. They drove to their father's house. Inside, everything looked untouched. A cup of half-finished coffee, sketches on the table, old photographs on the wall. And above the piano, a portrait of their mother. Lily opened the letter. There were only a few lines inside. "If I'm gone, find Clara. She knows what to do. Forgive me, my daughter. There are things you must know." "Clara? His sister? But she's dead," Oliver exclaimed. "No," Lily said quietly. "Maybe not." They found an address written in his notebook, an old house in northern Devon. And they went there. Clara Harris turned out to be a silver-haired woman with sharp, knowing eyes. She recognized them the moment they appeared at her door. "You look like him," she said to Lily. And like her, Margaret was strong. "Where's my father?" Lily asked. Clara silently handed her an envelope. Inside was a birth certificate and a photograph of a baby. On the back, Lily, 1996. Mother, Clara Harris. The world tilted. "That's not true. It can't be." "It is, child," Clara whispered. Edward couldn't have children. Margaret knew, and she agreed. But the world was never meant to know. Lily stood frozen, staring at the photo, feeling her identity collapse inside her. "Why did he hide it?" she whispered. "Because he was afraid you'd stop loving him. But he wants you to know before it's too late." They found their father the next morning, sitting by the sea where the glass house once stood. He didn't turn when she approached. He just said softly, "I knew you'd come." She stood beside him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd look at me and see not a father, but a liar." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I never betrayed you, Lily. I only wanted to have you. And maybe, for once, I did something right." She sat beside him, watching the waves crash against the rocks, the same sound as 10 years ago. "You were my father," she whispered. "Nothing can change that." He smiled, quietly, peacefully, like a man who had finally laid down his burden. Months later, Lily sold her London flat and returned to Cornwall. She opened a small art gallery by the sea, filled with photographs of the old house, the waves, and the light. On the wall hung a sign: "The strongest glass is forgiveness." Sometimes Margaret came to visit. They never spoke about the past, they simply sat together, listening to the ocean. Because the truth no longer hurt. It simply was.